In 2008, a fine wine collection at Crew Restaurant in Manhattan had been proceeding as expected, with collectors and experts eagerly bidding on rare bottles worth thousands of dollars. But just as 22 bottles of rare Burgundy from the mid-20th century were about to go under the hammer, an unsuspected guest in the auction room, sitting quietly in the audience, goes by the name Laurent Ponceau, stood up from his seat and called for the auction to stop, claiming that the wines were fakes. Now, Laurent Ponceau is the owner of Domaine Ponceau, one of the most respected wineries in Burgundy. 97 bottles of his family wines were about to be auctioned, and he knew for a fact that a vast majority were unquestionable fakes. The auction house immediately withdrew the disputed bottles from sale. Moments later, all attention fell on the seller of the controversial bottles, Rudy Kurniawan.
He turned his home into a wine factory, said prosecutor Joseph Facciaponte of the defendant, and created what he called his magic cellar.
This is the true story of taking down the greatest wine scammer of all time. For years, Rudy had been a rising star in the elite world of fine wine collecting. He seemed to appear out of nowhere in the early 2000s, quickly gaining a reputation as a connoisseur, purchasing bottles worth hundreds of thousands of dollars per month. His deep pockets and willingness to spend lavishly on the rarest wines turned him into a celebrity in the wine collecting world. He impressed everyone with an almost supernatural ability to blind taste rare wines and identify them down to their vineyard and vintage. He was known for hosting lavish wine tastings, rubbing shoulders with billionaires and Hollywood stars. Rudy lived extravagantly in a California mansion, drove fancy cars, and was always seen in custom-tailored suits. He had the kind of money that made people assume he was the real deal. But despite his immense influence in the wine world, Rudy's true background remained a mystery. He claimed to come from a wealthy Indonesian Chinese family, but there was little to no verified information about his past.
To answer your question, I come from a wealthy family. Good family. No, that's not background.
Collectors were blinded by his charisma, his lavish spending, and his deep knowledge of wine. Few questioned where his wealth came from or why no one in the wine industry had heard of him before the early 2000s, but his mysterious background was about to be revealed.
He is the CEO of Acker, Merrill & Condit, and this year he has auctioned off more than $100 million, the first wine house to do so. John Capon joining me.
This is John Capon, a young and ambitious auctioneer from the family-run wine business Acker, Merrill & Condit, one of the top wine auction firms in the world. Capon and his firm lavish praise on Rudy's collection, billing his auctions as once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. With Capon's support, Rudy's influence peaked in 2006 thanks to two record-breaking auctions, where his personal collection was the star and brought in a combined $35 million. The wine world was captivated by Rudy, trusting his word, his palate, and most importantly, his bottles. But no one questioned how he was able to supply such an endless stream of rare, old, and valuable wines. That is, until Ponceau's bold interruption shattered the illusion. In the immediate aftermath of the 2008 auction, collectors and experts started scrutinizing Rudy's wines. Some had long harbored quiet doubts, but Ponceau's claims forced them into action. Billionaire collector Bill Koch, who had spent more than $2 million on more than 200 bottles of what he believed was rare wine at an auction, including some of Rudy's, became deeply suspicious. He hired a team of investigators to examine his collection, and what they found was damning. Labels didn't match historical records, some bottles had inconsistencies in font styles, aging marks, and even the texture of the paper. Experts who tasted the wines noticed discrepancies in flavor. Then, there was the most glaring error of all. A second series of lots consisted of Ponceau's Clos Saint-Denis, a variety of 38 bottles in total, ranging from 1945 to 1971. The problem? Domaine Ponceau Clos Saint-Denis wine wasn't even produced until 1982.
You got that right, my friend, you got that right.
Rudy had made a catastrophic mistake, and it was now impossible to ignore. Ponceau started an investigation of his own, He met Kurniawan in person on several occasions. On one occasion at dinner, Ponzo asked him where his wines come from. He said that he bought so many wines that he didn't know where they came from. But after a month, Rudy told Ponzo that he bought the wines in Jakarta and it has been sold by Mr. Pak Hendra. He gave them 2 phone numbers to help him find the origins of the bottles. The first number came back to an airline, the largest airline in Indonesia, Lion Air, and the second one came back to a strip mall. When Ponzo arrived in Jakarta and asked for any information about Mr. Pak Hendra, he found out that Pak means Mr. and Hendra is the most common name in Indonesia.
That's me, of course. No.
By 2012, the FBI launched an official investigation into Rudy Kurniawan. This name has been on the FBI's watch list for a very long time. They looked into his finances, his sources, and most crucially, his collection. Finally, on March 8th of 2012, federal agents raided Rudy's mansion in Arcadia, California, and what they found was straight out of a crime thriller. Inside his home was a full-fledged counterfeit wine operation, a veritable forgery lab. Investigators discovered stacks of counterfeit wine labels from some of the world's most prestigious vineyards. There were empty bottles of rare vintages, corks, stamps, and even aging tools to make labels and glass appear older. It was clear Rudy wasn't just selling counterfeits, he was making them. Rudy's operation was as sophisticated as it was audacious. He would collect empty bottles from restaurants and tastings, then refill them with blended cheaper wines designed to mimic the flavors of rare vintages. His palate was indeed extraordinary, not because he could identify wines with supernatural accuracy, but because he could recreate them from lesser bottles with shocking precision. Using aged corks, labels artificially worn to appear decades old, and wax seals carefully manipulated to look authentic, Rudy's wines were nearly indistinguishable from the real thing. And the world had bought it, literally. His counterfeit empire was worth an estimated $550 million, and the ripple effects of his fraud still haunt the industry today. In December of 2013, Rudy's trial began, drawing massive attention from both the media and the fine wine community. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence, including testimony from leading winemakers, collectors, and FBI agents who had investigated Rudy's operation. The defense argued that Rudy was simply a scapegoat, claiming the wine industry had long been plagued by counterfeits. They suggested that Rudy himself had been deceived by others, but the evidence was too compelling. After deliberation, the jury found Rudy guilty of mail and wire fraud, the first person ever convicted in the US for wine-related fraud. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison in order to pay $28.4 million in restitution and forfeit another $20 million to the authorities. It was also discovered that he had committed bank fraud, taking out more than $7 million in loans with no intention of repaying them. To top it all off, he had been living in the US with a warrant out for his arrest. At that point in time, his student visa had run out, and if he left the country, he'd never get back in. One thing that was pretty consistent was that no one really knew where his supposed wealth came from, or anything about his background. He used different names, including Leniwati Tan, or Lenny Tan, which was actually his mother's name. Even the names Rudy Kurniawan and his brother Dar Saputra were taken from famous Indonesian badminton players. Following his conviction, auction houses implemented stricter verification processes, including forensic label analysis, bottle examinations, and provenance tracking. Billionaires and collectors who had once dismissed the possibility of fraud now demanded more rigorous authentication before dropping hundreds of thousands on a single bottle. Rudy Kurniawan's story is one of deception, audacity, and sheer ingenuity. He was released in November 2020 and deported to Indonesia. His impact on the fine wine world is undeniable. He didn't just counterfeit wine, he shattered the very illusion that made it valuable. Previously, the industry had relied heavily on trust and legacy, but Rudy exposed how easily that trust could be exploited.